Muy buenas tardes. En esta oportunidad nosotros tenemos un invitado muy especial, es un invitado muy de nuestra América. Tenemos ante nosotros al Premio Nobel de Literatura de 1992, don Derek Walcott, nada menos. Él trae la fresca visión y la especial visión de los americanos que trascienden las fronteras y se convierten en personajes mundiales más allá de los límites que tenemos en cada uno de nuestros países. El New York Times en 1990 señaló ya con toda claridad que ningún poeta puede rivalizar realmente con Mr. Walcott en humor, profundidad emocional, fructuosidad en su inventiva y en el lenguaje o en la habilidad para expresar sus pensamientos o sus personajes y además llevar al lector a seguirlo a través de toda esta mutación de ideas en sus mentes. Para nosotros que conformamos un hemisferio variado pero hermano, la presencia de un profesor que trae la visión de la literatura, ya no solamente desde el campo político, sino fundamentalmente desde el campo cultural, es especialmente significativa. Los hombres y mujeres de nuestro continente que nos están viendo en los lugares, en las capitales, por cierto, pero en los lugares más lejanos de cada uno de ellos, los que están en las facultades de literatura de los sitios que no están en el centro de nuestra república, sino al contrario, en algunos lugares un tanto apartados, van a ver en realidad el genio de una personalidad realmente importante en el mundo en general. Yo les decía, y permítanme un tinte personal en esta discusión, cuando le dije a mi hijo que es artista que vendría el profesor Walcott, él me dijo, va a venir a fin de mes, ¿por qué no puedes moverlo para el próximo mes? Yo le digo, no es tan fácil, es casi imposible tener al profesor Walcott entre nosotros y realmente somos muy afortunados en tenerlo. Profesor Walcott, es para América un honor tenerlo como uno de los suyos, es para América un honor poder escucharlo y es para todo el continente un privilegio que usted hable desde esta cátedra, la Cátedra de las Américas. Muchas gracias por acompañarnos y tiene usted la palabra, profesor Walcott.
One? Oh, you're on. The red light is right there. But we haven't...
You may go in.
We're going into the lecture room directly? Yes, right now. You have nothing to say? I have nothing to say. I will pick up afterwards.
It is obviously a tremendous honor to be here. Sorry. When I was invited to this address, I was in the usual torment of trying to express myself in prose. I'm not a logical thinker. I'm not a good thinker. I am luckily a poet in the sense that as a poet I might begin a sentence meaning one thing and by the time I come to the end of the sentence I have contradicted myself. But that's something that Walt Whitman, the great American poet, said. Do I contradict myself? Very well, I contradict myself. To do this contradiction in front of an august body of ambassadors and other jefes is terrifying. And then it isn't terrifying because they're evidently human beings too. Meaning by this that at the core of ambassadorial or diplomatic responsibility there is conscience. And I thought if I were going to do something like this, then maybe I should choose not a prose piece in which I might say predictable things like the great future that lies ahead for everybody, or the great future that does not lie ahead for everybody. There are only two versions of that. And do something in the middle, maybe. So what I'm going to inflict on several hundred people, maybe a million people, I don't know, is a poem. But I'm glad to try to do that because poets in the 20th century are not often encouraged to say anything, especially in verse, about anything. And yet, what we have to deal with in the world is we have to deal with conscience, and we have to deal with responsibility, and we have to deal with the treachery we inflict on ourselves, sometimes unwillingly. The horrors that have happened in the 20th century and seem to be perpetuating themselves in the 21st century continue. And this body that sits here today is concerned with those horrors, some unimaginable, some repeated. It's not my duty to do anything else than what a poet always does in a society. One poet wrote once that all a poet can do is warn, W-A-R-N. So I'm not here to be prophetic, and yet in another society, a place of honor like this might have been natural, that a poet would speak to ambassadors and senators and politicians in another kind of civilization. In our civilization, that voice is muted or confined to literary periodicals or an occasional conference. What I'm going to read, therefore, is a very casual thing, and I'll tell you without turning it into a literary seminar what it's about and why I thought it would be good to read it on this occasion. This is about a man who I don't know too much about. It's not a work of fiction, so I'm not a novelist. I don't know who my character really is. I am a playwright, but in this situation, I'm not sure who he is, who is talking. And I'm not sure, I'm not certain of his biography. All I know is he seems to work for UNESCO or one of these large institutions. He seems to have been someone in the academic world, a professor in some university, a minor university in England, who has a great affection for the Jacobean poets following Shakespeare. And he somehow gets involved in a deal with a third world country. He is not dishonest, but what he does creates an upheaval in the country that he is dealing with. Let me just say that for me, this particular poem was a very exciting challenge because its model was that of a novella by Graham Greene or by John le Carré. In other words, a kind of political thriller with a negative ending, but the construction of it was a work of fiction done in verse. And that was challenging to me. The person involved in it centrally is someone afflicted with a desire to do good, but constrained by circumstances, by conflicts, by certain realities. So apparently, he makes a deal with a third world country, something involving tractors or something. I don't know. I'm like eavesdropping on the situation, even if I created it. So I try to make myself oblique to the situation. I'm not involved in it. I am reporting it or eavesdropping on it. But at the heart of it, as I wrote this and continued to write it, I realized that I was engaging in something very, very big, very huge as a theme. And that theme had to do with the horror of the 20th century, with the Holocaust, the fact that the 20th century is testament to famine, to disease, and to all of those joyous things that you have to occupy yourself with every day in your offices. I felt that the man I was writing about was the average man, not a hero, not a great intellectual. And the epigraph I took was from the book of Revelations. And when I found it, it caused me a lot of pain just to even say it now. Because the last line that says, "And see thou hurt not the oil and the wine," is incredibly painful. It seems to me to say, don't spoil the oil and the wine. Don't hurt the oil and the wine. That warning is a warning to everyone, but particularly, hopefully, to people who are entering power. Not people already in power, but those entering power. See, thou hurt not the oil and the wine. The title I took changed from the title by Thomas Nash about the plague year in London, called The Unfortunate Traveler. My title is The Fortunate Traveler. As I look in front of me, I see the names of all these countries. Some of them I've gone to. And the role of this person, this anti or non-hero in this poem, is one who has access to travel, who can go to all these countries, who can go to meetings in those countries, who can go around the tables and discussions and be interviewed and make statements, but who is fortunate enough always to be able to leave those countries that are in suffering, so that somebody may visit a famine as an ambassador, as a delegate for something, and still get 3 meals and see the sick and the suffering, but know that he has a return ticket, or she has a return ticket. And that return ticket makes him a fortunate traveler, in the sense that that traveler does not have to endure what he sees. But that's what we have to do. We have to share that suffering that we see, that mass suffering that we see, these enormous disasters that are so big they don't even touch us privately. Some disasters are too big to apprehend. And so one single digit can't make a difference in terms of our own suffering. And yet that's what the basis of all of these organizations in the 20th century are based basically on compassion, not on economy. They're not based on how much money X has, but what can one country contribute to the well-being of the world. And my character in this poem is trying to do that, but he makes a tragic mistake in trying to make a deal with another country for something else involving tractors, as I said, and I don't know what the deal was, but he is doomed to be killed by the enemy of that country that he helped. This is very normal. The quotation, as I said, is from Revelations, and the poem was dedicated when it was written to Susan Sontag, who has recently died. And I heard a voice in the midst of the 4 beasts say, a measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny, and see thou hurt not the oil and the wine. So it will be a kind of a monologue in which I am probably the person that I'm writing about. It was in winter, steeples, spires congealed like holy candles. Rotting snow flaked from Europe's ceiling. A compact man, I crossed the canal in a grey overcoat, on one lapel a crimson buttonhole for the cold ecstasy of the assassin. In the square coffin manacled to my wrist, small countries pleaded through the mesh of graphs, in treble-spaced Xeroxed forms to the World Bank, on which I had scrawled the one word, mercy. I sat on a cold bench under some skeletal lindens. Two other gentlemen, black skins gone grey as their identical belted overcoats crossed the wide river. They spoke the stilted French of their dark river, whose hooked worm multiplying its pale sickle could thin the harvest of the winter streets. Then we can depend on you to get us those tractors. I gave my word. May my country ask why you are doing this, sir? Silence. You know, if you betray us, you cannot hide. A tug, smoke trailing its dark cry. So at the beginning, he makes, this is the plot, this is the deal in which he's made some obscure transaction which he thinks is going to benefit the country, but which is going to turn around and let him down. At the window in Haiti, I remember a gecko pressed against the hotel glass with white palms, concentrating head, with a child's hands. Mercy, monsieur, mercy, which is a pun on merci, monsieur, merci. Famine sighs like a scythe across the field of statistics, and the desert is a moving mouth. In the hold of this earth, 10 million shoreless souls are drifting. Somalia, 765,000. The skeletons will go under the tidal sand. The whole question of figures, of numbers, whether of disasters, of famine, of massacre, is something we get used to in the daily papers and we look at with a helpless shrug. The more it happens, the more we get used to disaster. So now we measure disasters numerically, like only 50,000 people died in Pakistan. That's the kind of statement we are used to, maybe because of the access of the press. Not that we are heartless, but we are used to those figures. Those numbers become a part of our daily breakfast. We'll meet you in Bristol to conclude the agreement. Steeples like tribal lances, through congealing fog, the cries of wounded church bells wrapped in cotton, grey mist enfolding the conspirator like a sealed envelope next to its heart. No one will look up now to see the jet fade like a weevil through a cloud of flour. One flies first class, one is so fortunate. Like a telescope reversed, the traveler's eye swiftly screws down the individual sorrow to an oval nest of antic numerals, and the iris, interlocking with this globe, condenses it to zero, then a cloud. He has come back from some assignment somewhere now, back to London. Beetle black taxi from Heathrow to my flat. We are roaches, riddling the state cabinets, entering the dark holes of power, carapaced in topcoats, scuttling around columns, signaling for taxis with frantic antennae. To other huddles with roaches, we infect with optimism. And when the cabinets crack, we are the first to scuttle, radiating separately back to Geneva, Bonn, Washington, London. Under the dripping plains of Hampstead Heath, I read her letter again, watching the drizzle disfigure its pleading like mascara. Margot, I cannot bear to watch the nations cry. Then the phone. We will pay you in Bristol. Days in fetid bedclothes, swallowing cold tea, the phone stifled by the pillow. The telly a blue storm with soundless snow. I'd like the gas and see a tiger's tongue. I was rehearsing the ecstasies of starvation for what I had to do. For a while, for a few days maybe, because he's going to be going to a country in which people are starving, He starves himself for a while, just for a while, but to see what agony starvation can bring with it, and that he hopes this might make him bring a stronger understanding of his responsibility. I was rehearsing the ecstasies of starvation for what I had to do, and have not charity. I found my pity desperately researching the origins of history, from reed-built communes by sacred lakes, turning with the first sprocketed, water-driven wheels. I smelled imagination among bestial hides by the gleam of fat, seeking in all races a common ingenuity. I envisaged an Africa flooded with such light as alchemized the first fields of emmer wheat and barley, when we savages dyed our pale dead with ochre and bordered our temples with the ceremonial vulva of the conch. In the grey epoch of the obsidian adze, I sowed the Sahara with rippling cereals. My charity fertilized these aridities. What was my field? Late 16th century. My field was a dank acre. A Sussex Don, I taught the Jacobean anxieties, the white devil. Flaminio's torch startles the brooding ewes. The drawn end comes in strides. I loved my Duchess, the white flame of her soul blown out between the smoking cypresses. Then I saw children pounce on green meat with a rat's ferocity. I called them up and took the train to Bristol. My blood, the Sevens, dregs and silver. On Sevens estuary, the pieces flash. Iscariot's salary, patron saint of spies. I thought, who cares how many millions starve? Their rising souls will lighten the world's weight and level its gull glittering waterline. We left at sunset down the estuary. He leaves England. England recedes. The forked white gull screeches, circling back. Even the birds are pulled back by their orbit. Even mercy has its magnetic field. Back in the cabin, I uncap the whiskey, the porthole missed with glaucoma. By the time I'm pissed, England will be that pale serrated indigo on the sea line. You are so fortunate you get to see the world. Indeed, indeed, sirs, I have seen the world. Spray splashes the portholes and vision blurs. Leaning on the hot rail, watching the hot sea, I saw them far off, kneeling on hot sand in the pious genuflections of the locust, as Ponce's armored knees crush Florida to the funereal fragrance of white lilies. He has arrived now in a place where he is hiding, somewhere in the Caribbean. Now I have come to where the phantoms live. I have no fear of phantoms, but of the real. The Sabbath benedictions of the islands, treble clef of the snail on the scored leaf, the tantum ergo of black choristers soars through the organ pipes of coconuts. Across the dirty beach, surplice with lace, they pass a brown lagoon behind the priest, pale and unshaven in his frayed soutane, into the concrete church at Canaries. As Albert Schweitzer moves to the harmonium of morning and to the pluming chimneys, the groundswell lifts Lebensraum, Lebensraum. Black faces sprinkled with continual dew. Dew on the speckled croton, dew on the hard leaf of the knotted plum tree, dew on the elephant ears of the Dashin. Through Kurtz's teeth, white skull in elephant grass, the imperial fiction sings. Sunday wrinkles downriver from the heart of darkness. The heart of darkness is not Africa. The heart of darkness is the core of fire in the white center of the Holocaust. The heart of darkness is a rubber claw selecting a scalpel in antiseptic light, the hills of children's shoes outside the chimneys, the tinkling nickel instruments on the white altar. Jacob, in his last card, sent me these verses. Think of a God who doesn't lose his sleep if trees burst into tears or glaciers weep. So aping his indifference, I write now, not Anno Domini, after Dachau. The night maid brings a lamp and draws the blinds. I stay out on the veranda with the stars. Breakfast congealed to supper on his plate. There is no sea as restless as my mind. The promontories snore. They snore like whales. Cetus the whale was Christ. The ember dies, the smoke, sky like an ash heap. Reeds wash their hands of guilt, and the lagoon is stained. Louder since it rained, a gauze of sandflies hisses from the marsh. Of course, the famous statement from Nietzsche is that God is dead. Since God is dead, and these are not his stars, but man-lit sulphurous sanctuary lamps, it's in the heart of darkness of this earth that backward tribes keep vigil of his body in dire lampion and this bedside lamp. Most of the tribes of this earth don't know Nietzsche's statement that God is dead, so they continue to praise him. Keep the news from their blissful ignorance. Like lice, the hungry of this earth swarm to the tree of life. If those who starve like these rain flies who shed glazed wings in light grew from sharp shoulder blades their brittle vans and soared toward that tree, how it would seethe our justice, that fires drench them like vermin, quotas prevent them, and they remain compassionate fodder for the travel book, its paragraphs like windows from a train. For everywhere that earth shows its rib cage and the moon goggles with the eyes of children, we turn away to read. Rimbaud learned that. Rimbaud at dusk, idling his wrist to water, past temples the plumed dates still protect in Roman fire, knew that we cared less for one human face than for the scrolls in Alexandria's ashes, that the bright water could not dye his hand any more than poetry. The Tao's silhouette moved through the blinding coinage of the river that endlessly, until we pay one debt, shrouds every night its ordinary secret. The drawn sword comes in strides. It stretches for the length of the empty beach. The fishermen's huts shut their eyes tight. A frisson shakes the palm trees and sweats on the traveler's tree. They found out my sanctuary. Philippe last night. It had 2 gentlemen in the village yesterday, sir, asking for you while you was in town. I tell them you was in town. They sent to tell you there is no hurry. They will be coming back. In loaves of cloud, and have not charity. The weevil will make a Sahara of Kansas. The ant shall eat Russia. Their soft teeth shall make and have not charity. The harvest's desolation. And the brown globe crack like a begging bowl. And though you fire oceans of surplus grain and have not charity, still through thin stalks the smoking stubble stalks grasshopper, third horseman, the leather-helmed locust. At lunch today we were having a conversation, and the gentleman on my right was asking me in the course of conversation about belief and optimism. And it was interesting, very interesting. And not as a consolation, but as an epiphany, I think, almost to what I've just read. There was this dream that was described to me by a young lady, and she said she had this vision of all the birds of the world beating in the sky. I didn't know what it meant, and I don't usually steal dreams, but I appropriated this one for this poem, and it's called The Season of Phantasmal Peace. And I think it is out of all the suffering described in the previous poem that this epiphany or absolution happens. Because at the end of pain there is time, and at the end of time there is reconciliation and healing. Then all the nations of birds lifted together the huge net of the shadows of this earth, in multitudinous dialects, twittering tongues, stitching and crossing it. They lifted up the shadows of long pines down trackless slopes, the shadows of glass-faced towers down evening streets, the shadow of a frail plant on a city sill, the net rising soundless as night, the birds' cries soundless, until there was no longer dusk or season, decline or weather, only this passage of phantasmal light that not the narrowest shadow dared to sever. And men could not see, looking up, what the wild geese drew, what the ospreys trailed behind them in silvery ropes that flashed in the icy sunlight. They could not hear battalions of starlings waging peaceful cries, bearing the net higher, covering this world like the vines of an orchard, or a mother drawing the trembling gauze over the trembling eyes of a child fluttering to sleep. It was the light that you will see at evening on the side of a hill in yellow October, and no one hearing knew what change had brought into the raven's cawing, the kildare's screech, the ember circling chuff, such an immense, soundless, and high concern for the fields and cities where the birds belong, except it was their seasonal passing, love made seasonless, or from the high privilege of their birth, something brighter than pity for the wingless ones below them who shared dark holes in windows and in houses. And higher they lifted the net with soundless voices, above all change, betrayals of falling suns. And this season lasted one moment, like the pause between dusk and darkness, between fury and peace. But for such as our earth is now, it lasted long. Thank you very much.
That was very good. We still have 26 minutes.
That good?
Yes, we do, sure. We'll see. Our poet was concerned that he had not left us time. And in a sense, his words transcended time, I think, for all of us, as he told them. I would like to welcome the rector of the university in Peru that has made the cátedra possible, and I am privileged to open the floor for dialogue. I use that rather than questions because I think we have to deal with an extraordinary range of ideas. Even mercy has its magnetic field. There are images and limits that are really quite extraordinary to what you have said. I wonder if anybody wishes to take the challenge. The Minister of El Salvador, Ambassador Menendez.
Gracias, señor secretario interino. Maestro Walcott,
6, creo que está. En el 6.
No, tiene correcto. Para inglés.
Más alto de repente.
Sí, ok. Bien. Ahí estamos.
Maestro, estoy sin palabras ante un hombre de palabras. En este lugar fantasmagórico que
Perhaps, Ambassador Menendez, if you could just speak until we may manage to identify the correct channel for Mr. Walcott. Speak so there will be translation.
Muy bien.
Está en inglés.
En
Muy
el
bien.
5 está en inglés, a ver si encuentro el 5.
Súbelo bastante.
muy bien.
5 English. Súbelo bastante.
Ah,
¿Sí? Now you getting English?
se cuenta con
Good.
Ok.
interpretación, ¿ya? ¿Sí? Con un hombre de letras nunca hay problema de comunicación. No. Decía maestro que estamos sin palabras ante un hombre de palabras, ante un hombre que está en libertad bajo palabras. En este lugar fantasmagórico que ahora lo recibe en un momento que califico de un momento cumbre, en una escena cumbre. ¿Por qué? Porque tras los días surrealistas que hemos pasado en función de nuestro propio quehacer, usted logra transformar ese realismo político que nosotros pensamos que vivimos en un momento de realismo mágico. Eso es lo que realmente trasciende. La cultura en tiempos de integración es evidentemente la Cenicienta. Y su poesía, al interpretar, al superar, al reinventar la realidad, nos hace entenderla un poco más. Me alegra que usted no se haya limitado, y como hombre de letras es imposible limitarlo, a un tema, sino que nos haya tocado en nuestra esencia con su palabra y con su verbo, su lenguaje, su identidad, sus raíces, la integración que nos permite construir comunes denominadores con sus gestos creadores. Una obra es más grande que su creador, y lo hemos personificado en usted esta tarde. Más temprano y más tarde usted nos ha dicho, se ha referido a esa contradicción en la que el poeta perfectamente puede incurrir en sus versos, y nos ha dicho que el poeta tiene un rol, una función de precaver. ¿Es usted un hombre poderoso? Usted está ungido del poder de la palabra, y le agradecemos el sagrado ejercicio de la libertad creadora y el ejercicio de la palabra. Gracias.
I don't enjoy the authority that my height confers. I really should be down there listening. On the other hand, it's no point doing a fake shyness about responsibility. What this experience up to this moment has taught me is that there is responsibility for poetry, an immense responsibility, and immense privilege to be listened to. So the experience of this afternoon is a phenomenal one. It has confirmed my calling, it has confirmed my life for me to be here. Not because it's such a distinguished honor, which it is, but because of the duty of my calling.
El embajador Royo de Panamá.
Muchas gracias, distinguido conferenciante, señor Walcott. Hace muchos años yo me vengo preguntando o diciendo a mí mismo cuán diferentes somos los mundos del Caribe y de América Latina. ¿Qué consejos, qué observaciones, qué comentarios podría usted hacernos para tratar de aproximar un poco estos dos mundos en el plano de la literatura? Ya en el plano de la política y de las relaciones diplomáticas lo estamos haciendo en esta organización OEA, pero en el plano cultural es muy poco lo que conocemos en América Latina de la literatura, de la cultura que se produce en las comunidades del Caribe. Y yo creo que viceversa también. Poco es lo que ustedes conocen de lo que se produce en América Latina. ¿Qué consejos podría darnos al respecto?
Perhaps it's already in process and has been in process for a while. Casas de las Americas, I think, tries to do that. I think what is needed is obviously an immense amount of translation from the most ordinary level up to the most literary level for the access that translation provides. But all the other things in the arts that manifest themselves, especially verbally, which would be, say, in the theater or musically, and that if it were possible to have a couple of central places in which, whether it's theater or whether it's literature, that we could have access to Spanish-American literature and French-American literature as well. So the thing that you have ahead of you, I'm sure, in your daily work is this problem of multilingual challenges that happen. For us in the Caribbean, I feel a great proximity with Marquez, not because he is Garcia Marquez, but because I feel he's very Caribbean. And I don't read Spanish, but I feel something in him that is so much Caribbean that it's there, and he himself says so. Well, if we can have that kind of exchange that happens even mentally, spiritually, then that's a great thing for unification of our territory, our area. So wherever we can raise it, I think that the cultural influence of things is much more important even than the economic vision that will happen here or there or anything like that. That's what has to be emphasized. Because we start off poor. We're at the bottom, so there's nowhere else to go but up. So it's not like being terrified of poverty if you do X or Y. There's a man once at a conference I was attending who claimed that it was a good thing to come from a poor society. And of course he was jeered at because it was an economic conference and that's not a good idea. But what he was saying was essential, that if all you have to depend on virtually are your imagination, your spirit, your virtues, then it's a good thing. If you're given everything, then that's kind of corrupting in a sense, to have everything, to be given everything. So I'm saying that the poverty that we have in this part of the world is something that can be made positive by using the organic material that we have instead of thinking of the technological.
Silvia Merega, Minister of Argentina.
Muchas gracias, señor, por sus expresiones poéticas que a mi criterio tienen un profundo contenido político. En ese sentido y en esta misma línea de análisis, quisiera preguntarle qué lugar tienen en sus reflexiones filosóficas dos conceptos, optimismo y esperanza.
They sound like two parties. I'm from the optimist party and you're from the hope party, but it's good. You know, to put me up here to answer questions of that nature is going to mean that I'm going to answer questions, or my answers are going to be so square, so cliche, that I'm afraid even to say them. Every undertaking, I think the question, the very simple question is, are people good? My reply to that is yes, people are good. People are good to each other. People help each other. Do nations help each other? Yes, they do. So whether that's optimism or just reality is not so important. I think that in terms of having an optimistic idea about anything, I couldn't be anything else, because there can never be such a thing as a poem of despair. Even a suicidal poem has to be good. Otherwise it's not a good poem. And the person who commits suicide just after doing a poem is somebody who just tried to create a thing of beauty just before he committed suicide. So it's kind of a contradiction to have despair as a subject of poetry. Now that's nonsense, but it's true. I think my answer is, if I'm on any side, I don't have to be on any side. I take it for granted that the instinct of everyone is altruistic. What kills, what destroys, is separating man from his instinct to help his brother. In other words, religion does disastrous things. And if religion says that my God is named X and yours is named Y, and therefore we have to kill each other, that's the height of absurdity, obviously. But what we have is absurd conduct. So the division that happens artificially. It is not an instinctual division. Somebody is not born a Nazi. Somebody is made a Nazi. Conditions make these things happen. And we are taught that by people who want X or Y for themselves or for their countries. But my argument about the basic instinct of man, regardless of what other poets have said about man being a wolf to man, that is true. But generally, the attitude of man to man is not that. I think it has always been one of altruism. And what has to be developed in the world is that feeling.
Ambassador Maria Tamayo of Bolivia.
Muchas gracias, Mr. Walcott. If I may, I'm going to direct myself to you in English. Thank you very much for your brilliant presentation. I think that in the tradition of T.S. Eliot, Robert Frost, and other great American poets and writers, you have given us a great lecture on what it is to deal with conscience and responsibility, as you yourself said. I was particularly also impressed because what you presented to us is a character of universal value. I think that it is what your main character and what you read to us applies not only to our hemisphere, but also as great literature is of universal content. However, I was also actually curious to ask you what you meant when your character says, "Don't hurt the oil and the wine." If you could please expand on that for us for a brief moment. Thank you. Muchas gracias.
The quotation, as I said, is from Revelations. And Revelations, especially in the King James Version, is a very poignant book. can be full of tremendous tenderness and pain. It's written by, according to legend, St. John. I think what it seems to me that the verse is saying is, do not do anything that injures what is natural and protective and nourishing. The oil and the wine are the basics which in that culture, in the Eastern culture, Middle Eastern culture, are crucial to survival. And not to corrupt it, not to injure it, not to use it, not to overuse it, not to underuse it, is to prevent that kind of evenness that should be there in a rich crop or in a rich harvest, and that the harvest need not be overwhelmingly rich, but that it is good and stable. And if that is so, then the condition of the tribe or the nation or the individual is also rich and grateful and stable.
Yes, I think it's good to go into the audience.
Oh, thank you so much. Following the gloomy scenario that you describe in your poetry, Russell Jacoby has mentioned in his book, The Last Intellectuals, that exists a crisis of intellectuals and writers in the contemporary age. There are not more heroes or heroines such as Octavio Paz, T.S. Eliot, or even Susan Sontag. What do you think about this statement? Are writers and intellectuals dead? Paraphrasing Nietzsche?
I didn't get some of that. Could you repeat part of it for me, please? That you're saying.
Okay. Russell Jacoby has mentioned in his book, The Last Intellectuals, that exists a crisis of intellectuals and writers in the contemporary age.
A little slower, please.
There are no more heroes such as Octavio Paz, T.S. Eliot, even Susan Sontag. What do you think about these statements? Are writers and intellectuals dead? Paraphrasing Nietzsche?
Not at all. Brecht said, look out for the country that wants heroes. Look out for the literature that wants heroes, too. I know people, I know writers who have this gentleness, a kind of ferocity of gentleness about them, who will not be swayed by other things. And to me, they are heroes. They are friends of mine, but they are heroic. And this is going to be to his great embarrassment, but I think Adam Zagajewski is a poet of that kind. A poet who believes in gentleness and beauty, and he's Polish, and he comes from the horror that sometimes can be Europe. So to me, he's a heroic figure, and he would hate to be told that. And if he knows that I said that at the OAS, he'll kill me. Which proves he's not such a heroic, gentle figure as I'm saying. So I don't believe that. I don't believe... People always say, the clouds were better in my time, or there were greener leaves long ago, or something like that. The human being can't help having nostalgia for something, and we all do it when we get old, We never used to do that, or we didn't do this when I was young, and cha-cha-cha. And the young get attacked for having that vitality and the change. So I don't think so. I don't think that criticism should be based on concepts of the heroic in literature at all. I disagree with that. I wish they were based on concepts of humility as opposed to heroism.
Is there somebody back?
Do you think...
The last comment and question, I fear.
Do you think that your inspiration is fueled by your need to express your art, or is it fueled by your need to influence and change the world?
If I had such ambitions, I'd design a uniform. I don't do that, I just write poems. And there have been people who have written poems and have been in uniform, like Mao. He was a poet. You have to answer serious questions seriously. I'm very lucky in that I knew my vocation from the age of the time I could articulate anything, from 6, 7, and had a mother who encouraged and protected me and urged me in that direction. So I never had a sense of calling that except for knowing that that's what I wanted to do, to be a poet. And I had one parent who understood this because of my father. Later on, though, when you begin to get some kind of reputation, and when you begin to be charged with a responsibility you don't necessarily want, like speaking for your people or that kind of stuff, then yes, you come into a stage in which you have to confront responsibility as a writer. And since I have to answer a question of identity like that, then I am emphatically and unchangeably, first of all, a solution for whatever that means, and then a Caribbean person, secondly, and then, I don't know, a human being, thirdly, maybe.
I think that we have run our time, and yet we feel that we have just had a taste. There is something very difficult about the vision of the fortunate traveler who does not have to endure what he sees. On the other hand, you have given us a gift, in referring to somebody else, which I will pick up and requote, because it has to do with you and the gift that you have given us this afternoon. You have talked about the ferocity of gentleness. And in a basic way, you have told us, be human, remember your roots, and keep them simple and true to what is natural. And we thank you very much for that.